Do you suffer from painful, heavy periods, PMS, mood swings, or migraines? Are you tired of being told they are just normal parts of life? Or are you afraid your child's going to suffer these symptoms too? At Vividus, the full of life company, we take the pain, misery, and confusion out of those menstrual cycles and replace them with tools of empowerment and time management so you can be Vividus. Visit embracingflowpodcast.com for more information on transforming your cycles from ow to wow.
Ever felt frustrated being told PMS, heavy bleeding, and cramping are just normal parts of life? You're not alone. I loathed my monthly cycle for decades. That all changed when I earned 3 health coaching certifications discovering something incredible. Your period is vital. It is an outward sign of your inner health, and it holds the key to unlocking your full potential. I've been there battling heavy, painful periods, and I turn them into cycles with minimal PMS and cramping. Today, I'm on a mission to share that information with you. Pour a cup of your favorite drink, get comfy, and grab your headphones as we embark on a candid and empowering journey of self-discovery. Together, we'll demystify menstrual cycles, explore cyclical living, delve into natural birth control, and guide parents through those crucial period talks with tweens and teens. It's time to break the taboo around menstruation and embrace the wisdom it holds. I'm your host, Heather Allmendinger, and this is the Embracing Flow podcast.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us on Embracing Flow. I'd like to introduce our guest today, an expert at Embracing Flow, Mr. Mike Gaskins. Mike, thank you so much for being on Embracing Flow. I am super excited you're here. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Heather. Thanks for having me on the show.
I'm just overwhelmed with having you here, and guess here's why. Mike Gaskins is an author and media producer who began his journey as a women's health advocate after a world-renowned physician lied to him about birth control side effects. This chance encounter triggered a passion for research that led Mike to discover many shocking levels of deceit and misinformation surrounding these potent drugs. He frequently writes for a number of websites, and his book, In the Name of the Pill, explores the dubious nature of both the history and science of hormonal birth control. Oh my goodness. When we spoke initially, I was just a member of your Facebook group, um, Straight Talk About Birth Control. And I was amazed to see that the originator was male. And I know that you've addressed that several times. How did you get into this very women specific arena?
Um, yeah, it's funny. So we met in that Facebook group, and even in that group, I always keep my book separate from the Facebook group. I want it to be a place where women can talk, openly and honestly about birth control. And I never use it like as a forum to promote my book or anything like that. So I never bring it up. But even in there, I've been surprised at how few times that question has arisen of, why did a man start this group or why is a man an administrator? I think in the years it's been that question's only probably come up 3 or 4 times, and women are usually pretty satisfied with the answer. Um, and it's funny because I think when I first started digging into birth control, that's one of the limitations I put on myself. It's kind of an obstacle I put in my own way. For a long time, I just held on to this data. And because of my video background, I kept thinking I wanted to do a documentary someday, but I kept feeling like I needed a female producer to partner with me. Like a man can't just tell this story. And so I let that really block me for a long time on doing anything, probably a few years. And then I read an article that another woman had written about the Nelson Pill hearings, which I'm obsessed with. And so I contacted her and we started talking, and she was the one who said, hey, would you like to write some articles? And so that kind of, that was my first catharsis to start letting some of this information out and start releasing some of my findings. But really, the passion for it started with, as you said, I was doing a conference, a live conference. It was for continuing medical education for doctors in all different specialties, and the whole subject of the conference was autoimmune disease. And so the keynote speaker on the first night was Dr. Noel Rose from Johns Hopkins, who he's called the father of autoimmune disease. He's the one who he was studying Hashimoto's thyroiditis in rabbits, and I believe it was in the late 50s. and he came up with this idea of the body's immune system attacking itself, and he gave it the name autoimmune disease. And so it was really fascinating to get to hear him speak. And as he kind of described it, he said, we've known from the beginning estrogen plays a key role in autoimmune disease because of the role it plays in a woman's immune system during her reproductive years, especially. Um, he talked about how T cells are the soldiers of the immune system, and our natural estrogen attaches to these soldiers, and that's what arms them and gives them their marching orders. But when chemicals get in our body that mimic natural estrogen, they attach to those cells, and so now the soldier's armed, but it doesn't know what to attack. And he really laid it out in layman's terms, and I was fascinated, and as he talked, I had never really heard of endocrine disruptors before. So as he talked, I was thinking, chemicals that mimic natural estrogen, and the only thing I could think of was birth control, because it's designed specifically to mimic natural estrogen. And so I assumed that's what he was talking about. And I was fascinated. I was like, why have we never heard about birth controls linked to all of this? And this is fascinating. And he's acting so matter of fact, like everybody knows. And so, as he talked, I Googled rise of autoimmune disease, and I saw since like 1970, so many of these diseases have just skyrocketed. And, so the more he talked, the more convinced I was that's what he was talking about. And so I told my audio guy, I was like, "Hey, I wanna take the mic off him when he's finished. This is fascinating to me." And so I went up and struck up a conversation with him and grabbed the mic, and I said, "So what role does birth control play in all this?" And he said, "Oh, none at all." And I was baffled. I was totally baffled, and I said, "Well, that makes no sense. It's counterintuitive based on everything you just said." And he doubled down. He said, "No, no, there's never been any evidence linking any of these diseases to birth control." And I believed him. I didn't doubt him, which is what we tend to do, right? He's the world-renowned authority, and he's telling me this, so it's gotta be true. And, but I was still thinking about it, when I got back to the hotel that night, and I picked lupus out of thin air and Googled lupus plus oral contraceptives, and I found this new study that had come out, and there was an article about it, and it found that women who took birth control were 50% more likely to be diagnosed with lupus. And I'm thinking, wow, maybe Dr. Rose hasn't heard about this study. And I get about halfway down the article, and there's a quote from him. Dr. Rose is quoted in the article saying this study doesn't mean women should stop taking birth control for some small increased risk. So at that moment, I was really baffled. It's like, why would he lie to me? I felt like I'd been kind of gaslighted, why, and I thought, well, maybe he just thought I was a simpleton and it was easier just to say there's no evidence or whatever. But still, I could, I was kind of outraged that he had outright lied to me about it. And that kind of caused me to dive deeper into the rabbit hole and start looking at all these other autoimmune diseases and then, other things like breast cancer and strokes and things like that. And it just kind of it just kind of ignited a passion that's never really died.
Yeah, I know that I hear it quite often. Oh, yeah, birth control, it's not going to hurt you. It's not going to harm you. My education says definitely to the contrary. I know it's against the medical establishment to kind of push back, but I know that we're also finding here recently we've got to be our own self advocates and be aware that we do have to push back. Um, I know that you've experienced, not personally, but in this realm, you have acquaintances who've paid an ultimate price for putting their child or being on hormonal birth control. Would you be open to sharing some of those stories, if if that's okay?
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. And I'm grateful to those families who, they've been so generous, I guess is the right word, generous and open with sharing the stories about their daughters with me and willing to let me share their stories as well. And it's one of the, you never know how you would react when you're in that boat. It's one of those I don't know how I would stay sane, much less being able to share the story over and over to try to help other women not, fall into that trap. But I've met so many families that are doing just that. And I had met several families whose daughters had died. As I started writing, you that's one of the things, when you write about something, you start to kind of your circle starts to grow as far as people you meet who have been affected by these things or who already are passionate about it. And, so I met I met families who had lost daughters or wives to birth control, and I don't know, it's heartbreaking. You hear their story, and there's something different about when it's already in the past tense when you meet them. It's a part of their history already. Um, but I think the one that really, just drove it home to me how painful it is and how much of a tragedy it is, made it more real, more real in my mind, I guess, was I had written an article, um, that came out. A gentleman found it about 2 weeks after his daughter died, um, and he found it, read it, and realized it had published on the same day she died. And he reached out to me and asked if I'd be willing to talk to him. So we had several conversations, and I think kind of going on that journey with him when the pain was still so raw, um, made it so much more real to me to realize what these families had gone through. That's one of the things I still try to do. It's so easy for us to, we look at statistics and numbers and this many women died, and it's easy for us to, even if it touches us, it's easy for us to kind of lose sight of that that one death, that one woman who was 19, 20 years old and had her full life ahead of her, and all the people who were injured by that death. And I've known now a couple of mothers who eventually committed suicide because their daughter died on birth control. And so you've got another tragedy. And so there's just layers and layers of tragedy. But going through it with Anthony at the time, and him, his guilt, and then realizing, wait a minute, I didn't. His daughter had gone to Parenthood without him knowing, and she had gotten the prescription, so he didn't even know she was on birth control. But he was like, I should have discussed these things with her. And he was like, but then when I start Googling, he said, I realize how hard it is to find the truth about how dangerous these things are, because all these articles that pop up are just good news stories about how great birth control is. And he was like, so I was at a disadvantage to even know to give her a warning. And just following through, kind of walking side by side with him as he went through that really impacted me a lot. It's something that changed me forever, really. And there's this he talked about he was on his way to work. His daughter was at home. They were expecting a repairman at the house, and when the repairman came, she went out on the driveway and just collapsed and died. And they had had some warning signs leading up to it, but it was kind of a typical kind of thing. She had started having lower back pains, earlier on. The doctors assumed she had pulled a muscle working at Whole Foods, lifting a box or something, and so they gave her muscle relaxers. It kind of seemed to help, whatever, and then she started getting this cough and having a little trouble breathing, and they thought she had a lung infection of some sort, and they gave her antibiotics and told her. So it went over the course of a couple of months, and then finally she collapsed and died. No one ever gave thought to maybe she had a pulmonary embolism, before her death. But he described sitting there in the emergency room when they were still hoping she could be, resuscitated, and his wife was talking about sitting on the driveway, um, holding her hand, waiting for the ambulance to come, and as his wife's telling him the story, he's picturing her and her sister learning how to ride bicycles on that same driveway and their whole childhood. And there's something about that image that just is still to this day, it just breaks my heart to think about, this father who's talking to his wife, who's sharing the story, and he's got all of these images of her growing up, and now she's dying in the room next door. And the doctor told him, it looked like a weapon of mass destruction had gone off inside her body. There were so many blood clots, they couldn't have donated any organs, not even her eyes, because she had so many clots in her body. And, I don't know, just, you hear stories like that, and it's hard not to be, passionate every day you wake up and want to warn, people. And I try to be cognizant of, I know if you go too hard, a lot of women are gonna think you're fear mongering. So I try really hard to not do anything that sounds like fear mongering, but at the same time, I want women to be informed, because I don't think they're being given an honest chance to make an informed decision, because doctors are discounting these real dangers so much.
Yep, and I am in agreement with you because I know when I went not too long ago for an annual exam, and they were asking me about what kind of hormonal birth control do I want to be on. And I had that whole list, and you can ask questions. Oh, you don't have to worry about that. Or this one's okay. And that one's okay. Here are some of the side effects. Um, and yes, when we do get whatever medication is prescribed, we have that booklet in the packet if we get it through the pharmacy. I've had many, many packets of hormonal birth control from a pharmacy. I know with the months of packets that I've had, I have never sat down and read what was in that packet other than maybe how to take my medication. I didn't look at because it's huge. It's like a map.
Mhm.
Um, with that, what I know that with the Nelson um, hearings, pill hearings, um, that came about because of that, correct? That big,
Yes.
huge that would you be explaining because you're a little I know of it, but you've engrossed yourself with that. So how did that kind of all play in? I mean, I can give the history of birth control and all that fun stuff. People don't want to hear it from me. They like to
Well,
hear
yeah,
it.
it's it's funny because you think about it, it's almost Shakespearean. It's like, okay, this happened. Well, is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? And this happened. Is that a good thing or it's a bad thing? The pill became the very first drug required to have a patient insert
Mhm.
information pamphlet, and and that came out of the Nelson Pill hearings. And one of the things the kind of the healthcare advocates who were questioning the safety of the drug in the first place, one of the things they wanted was just a really simple, clear, small little layout of here are the risks, kind of like we have with cigarettes now,
Mhm.
here are your risks. If anybody's still smoking today, we're pretty sure that they've been warned of the risks, and I feel like that's where we should be with birth control. We should have those same kinds of warnings. And the original patient information pamphlet was just a real clear cut. Here are the facts. Here's what we found so far. It looks like it could contribute to breast cancer. Here's what we've seen: a 7.5-fold increased risk in blood clots in women who take it. And just very simple data, very easy to see what the risks are. And the pharmaceutical companies with their lawyers then came in and, once they, I guess, kind of realized they had nowhere to go as far as fighting this pamphlet, they introduced all the language that then turned it into this mammoth map, like you said, that nobody's going to take the time to read, or hardly anyone. And yeah, so that did come out of the Nelson Pill hearings.
Yeah, it's amazing. I because I'm not on it, I don't have those packets, but I remember it's like it's thick and it's big and it's tiny little print. And that's not in multiple different languages. That's in English. And then you flip it over and it's in other
Right.
languages. Wait, with all of this experience, you wrote the book in the name of the pill. What all is covered in your book?
A little bit of everything, really. I mean, it's the first half of the book kind of looks at the history of the pill, which as I dove into the rabbit hole, I first started with, autoimmune diseases, and then I started looking at these other diseases, and then I read Barbara Seaman's book that came out in 1969 called The Doctor's Case Against the Pill, where she outlined some of the concerns, like breast cancer and sterility and things like that. So it was really interesting, and also Morton Mint's book that came out the same year. So it was interesting to see some of the things they laid out, thromboembolism and that. But so I started with kind of the disease and illness sides, but then I started learning about the Nelson Pill hearing, and that fascinated me. And I've never been a real history buff or anything, so it was kind of surprising to me how fascinating it was to jump into that. Um, but reading the hearings just opened up a whole new world of where we were socially at that time and how these things got approved without ever being proven safe. I mean, hormonal birth control has never been proven safe to this day. And to read that history was just, there were several times where I was, scraping my jaw up off the floor because I couldn't believe. I think part of what makes the Nelson Pill hearings fascinating is, one, it's the only time I can think of where the pharmaceutical companies had virtually no control over the message, what was being said. So that makes it fascinating. The other thing is they were in 1970, and they were headed by Senator Gaylord Nelson, who's also the father of Earth Day, and that was the first year of Earth Day, 19 later that year, 1970. And so as a conservationist and an environmentalist and somebody who had expressed some concerns about the growing population and what kind of threat it might pose to the planet, I think a lot of these people felt like he was on the same team as them, and they felt a lot more comfortable kind of sharing where their mindset was very real in very real terms talking to him, so much so that it made him uncomfortable. And he kind of stopped down the hearings at one point to say, I agree with your statement you're making about population being a concern, but I've never seen it as the doctor's prerogative to, sacrifice patients in the name of a greater social cause. And so that type of insight when you're reading the hearings just blew me away. And so a lot of the book, the first half focuses on that history and those questions that remain about why it was never proven safe, the trials, and then the second half is more about the medical consequences and even consequences beyond the women taking it. Because you have these very potent steroids that mimic our natural hormones, and to be effective, they have to resist degradation in stomach acid, stomach fluids, and everything, so they're not digested. They go through the body virtually unchanged. So, in this country, if we have 15 million women a day taking some form of hormonal birth control and then flushing it into the sewage system, and our sewage systems aren't designed to remove these, at these levels, this kind of microbial pollutant, it's being flushed out into our rivers, and so that's why we see intersex fish and we see fish populations dying, and we have to have hatcheries to keep certain, populations of fish going and everything, and it's moved up the food chain, and I believe it's affected, men's sperm counts. We see that all the time about how sperm counts have dropped dramatically since 1970. So I think it's really affecting all of us. It's not just a woman's issue once you look at the bigger picture and you look at the secondhand smoke effect, so to speak, of those people who are around the women who are taking it and how it's affecting all of us.
Yeah. No, and I agree. In 1970, my education has taught me 6.3 million women were taking hormonal birth, the combo pill that came out and had their testing in the late 50s. So in a short period of time, 6.3 million women were taking this in the United. I mean, that's a big number. And
Mhm.
because we're putting that into our body, as you had mentioned earlier, with the estrogen cell, the estrogen receptors on all of our cells, it's not just affecting our reproductive hormones and our reproductive system.
No.
It's
Right.
connected because our bodies are phenomenal machines, and it's connected to all 11 body systems. And so it's not just us, it's the eggs that we're carrying are also affected by it. So for those that were on it and have children, it's affecting our children. And then if you're carrying a daughter, it's affecting her eggs because
Right.
she's from an egg that was part of what was in your body, that the estrogen receptors had the hormonal birth control had a part of. So it affects everybody. It's not just a female issue or a woman's issue. It is an everybody issue. And we really need to be cognizant of that. So when somebody says, "Oh, it's my body, my choice." Yes, but what are you doing? Do you know what you're
Right.
doing to your body? Is that informed consent so they know and they're not coming back and saying, "Well, why didn't my doctor tell me this?" Because I see that a lot. Um, I know even in your Facebook group, we talk this straight talk about birth control. They bring up, "Well, why wasn't I told this? Well, why didn't my doctor tell me that?" And I know you see it with being the administrator and all the different questions, and I see it being a member of it. So yeah, it's not just a woman's
I used to
issue.
get that question a lot. Even before I started the Facebook group, I would strike up with conversations with women about their birth control. Women I was working with, I tend to work with a lot of different new groups of people that I've never worked with before, and used to people would say, how's your book coming, something like that, and then, oh, what are you writing about? And so it always opened up the doorway to have those conversations. And you find about women having, oh, I'm having this issue or that issue. The doctor said it's not related or whatever, and then I would try to lay out a case for, yeah, it is related. And they would be like, "Well, why should I listen to you instead of my doctor?" And my typical answer was kinda like, "Well, what do I have to benefit from it versus what does your doctor he's got a monetary reason for wanting you to stay on birth control, and he may even have a monetary reason for the secondary prescription he gives you to deal with the new symptoms he's created or whatever. I'm just a guy who, cares about you getting the truth. That's my only agenda." And, it's really funny how easily people can be swayed. I've had several conversations, and I wrote about one of them in the book with a guy that I was working with and his wife. And at first, he saw me writing, and we started the conversation, and he was like, "Oh, that's really fascinating. My wife has a couple of autoimmune diseases," and he's like, "But she developed them long before she ever took birth control." And I was like, "Yeah, I'm not saying every person who develops, not saying that." And he said, "But I am always curious about the timing and how it affects their disease and things like that." Well, he came in the next day, and this is just one example. This has happened so many times. Came in the next day, and he's like, "Well, I was talking to my wife, and turns out she did take birth control for a while when she was 17, just before she developed her first autoimmune symptoms." And he's like, "That's fascinating. I think they could have been related." And so started having those conversations. Well, the next time I worked with him, I asked him about it, and he was like, "Oh, no, she went to her doctor, and the doctor told her it's genetic. So now she thinks it's genetic, not the birth control pills." I've had that happen so many times to say,
Mhm.
"Well, yeah, autoimmune diseases are genetic. You have to be genetically predisposed, but still environmental triggers are the key to what triggers those, causes those disease to actually activate and become chronic ailments." And so yeah, it's pretty fascinating how easily a doctor's dismissal can completely gaslight a woman. Or, I know you've probably seen this in the group too. Women who they're taking the pill, they suspect it's causing whatever symptom.
Mhm.
The doctor tells them it's impossible, it's not. And then they stop taking the pill for a while and they feel better, the symptoms go away, and they start taking again and the symptoms come back and the doctor still convinces them it has nothing to do with the pill. It's that's pretty it's pretty good evidence that, okay, maybe I need to listen to my body instead of this doctor who's trying to convince me to stay on these drugs. And I'll add this. I did have one OBGYN she was near retirement, and she had kind of recognized the damage she had caused with birth control, and she had moved away from that and was doing different things in her practice. And she told me, she said, "You'll have a hard time finding anyone in my specialty who's willing to say anything bad about birth control because it represents about a third of their business." So, it's important to remember it is a business. It is a
Yep.
business,
Oh, it
you
it
know?
it most definitely is, and when I was in for my annual exam, I saw the chart on all the different forms of hormonal birth control and the percentage of individuals who get pregnant on the different kinds, and it has the calendar method on there, which calendar method I know isn't the most reliable, uh, but it was saying 85% effective out of 1 to 100, 85% effective at preventing pregnancy, but you had all these other ones, and if you would talk to your doctor about a fertility awareness-based method or knowledge-based method or something that has to do with the Billings ovulation method or fertility awareness, the natural without the hormonal birth control, like, "Oh, no, 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 you don't wanna do that. That you're almost guaranteed to get pregnant using that form," and I know that's an incorrect statement because I teach it and it's a 93 to 98% effective rate. Plus we become informed on our body and how it communicates. So it's
Yeah.
like it's I can see where it's a third of their business. And then you have all of the other symptoms that can then play a part into it and refer off to other doctors to help play that role. It's amazing and also kind of upsetting to the stomach, to be honest.
It is. And I don't mean to imply that doctors are bad. I think
Hmm.
most doctors are well intentioned, and I think a lot of them are ill informed, especially about fertility awareness methods and things of that nature. I know my brother used to be a physician's assistant, and he talked like they kind of lump fertility awareness in with the old rhythm method. They hear that and automatically think of the rhythm method. And he said they used to always tell people who were interested in that, well, what we call people who practice rhythm method, parents, because you're going to get pregnant. And I think that's kind of the mentality. And we've got this. We're very I think I told you when we spoke before, one of the lines that really stuck with me when I interviewed Dr. Zach Bush a few years ago was he talked about changing his whole practice because he woke up one morning and realized nobody is born with the pharmaceutical deficiency. And I think that's a mentality that's sorely missing in our medical community. We look for pharmaceutical treatments for just about anything, and even when they cause new symptoms, we don't think about removing that first pharmaceutical that caused the new symptoms. We just think about a second pharmaceutical that can help the and we create this curve of negative effects that is just I don't know. It feels like we're doing so many things backwards of the way we should be doing it, throughout medicine.
Yeah. No, and I'm not trying to say all doctors are bad. I look at their education. They're taught about the body. They're taught what medicines will help decrease the symptoms, make the have the patient feeling better, and versus looking at the root cause, which I think was the initial reason for medical doctors was to look at the root cause, to find the root cause. And somehow it's morphed into, okay, we're going to look at the symptoms. All right, you want an immediate fix? You want to feel better right away? Let's put you on this. This may help you. If not, we can try something else. If
Right,
you have these effects, we can add this to it. And
right,
there are other options, but they're not quick fixes. They take time, and we don't want to wait for
right.
those actual natural ones to take hold.
Yeah, we don't have the patience. I think the other thing too that came up in the Nelson Pill hearings a few times, and uh, I think we've kind of lost a sense of this too. Birth control was the first drug created to be taken chronically by healthy people to treat something that wasn't a disease. So, that was part of the reason that, Morton Mintz wrote that it was a scientific scandal when the truth about the Puerto Rico trials came out, because they were based on 132 individuals who took the pill for 12 consecutive months. And Morton Mintz's take was, first off, 132 is fewer than the number of women who will die in this year. And this was 1969, I think, when he wrote that. That's less women that will die this year from taking this drug. And they only took it for 12 years when we're going to be giving this to women for 15, 20, 25 years, who knows how long. So there was no real safety or efficacy established in the trials at all. And for me, that's one of the huge things whenever I do get pushback from somebody who says something like, well, no drug is 100% safe, look at this drug that treats cancer, blah, blah, blah. So, well, but that's treating cancer. We shouldn't hold it to the same standard of a drug that we're giving to a 15-year-old girl who's healthy, and she to treat her acne or whatever other, kind of off-label kind of, thing we put on. It's a totally different. We should not be using the same metric to say, well, it's okay. No drug is 100% safe. So sure, we can give this 15-year-old girl a drug for her acne that could cause her to have blood clots and die in a few weeks. It just doesn't seem reasonable. And, oh, that was another thing. I'm sorry. I'm all these things are firing through my mind. That was another thing that really jumped out at the Nelson Pill hearings to me. This was one of those moments where I just had to kind of stop and reread a couple of times. There were a few leading authorities who testified at the hearings when they were being questioned about, why, like Dr. Lewis Hellman, who was the head of the FDA committee, who said, essentially that birth control was safe, but he framed it in mitigating terms so that, so he could get the word safe in there. That was his whole objective, was to be able to write a sentence that he could throw the word safe in so that they could be approved. And one point he was talking about, the cancer risks that they had found, the breast cancer risk that they had found with birth control. And he said clearly, and sorry, Senator Nelson brought this up at the hearings. He had said in another forum that clearly, if a woman is concerned about cancer, she should look at something other than hormonal birth control. And Senator Nelson's question was, what woman isn't concerned about cancer? Are you saying, so only women who aren't concerned about cancer should take the pill? Then that eliminates pretty much every person, right? And uh, so when the doctors were pushed on things like this, they admitted that they changed the benefit to risk paradigm to get birth control approved. You think of benefit to risk, you think of, okay, we're going to look at this patient taking the pill and we're going to weigh the benefit to the risk for that woman. They changed that. They looked at the risk to the woman versus the benefit to society, because overpopulation was such a fear. The planet, population growth was out of control in their minds, and they were willing to incur a lot more risk to the individual woman for the benefit of society. That's something I still can't wrap my brain around, and I wish everybody would think about that every day, because anytime you find a story that actually covers a negative about birth control, oh, birth control has been linked to X, Y, or Z, all the time they're going to have some doctor in there who's willing to say, well, the benefits still outweigh the risks. It's like, all right, what benefits, what risks? I want to know at what point. And I want to ask these doctors, it's like, okay, how many women would have to die for you to say the benefit doesn't outweigh the risk anymore? Tell me a number. Tell me a number. How many women have to be killed for you to say, okay, yeah, okay, the benefits may not outweigh the risks anymore? We can't just keep looking at these individual things. You can't just look at breast cancer and say, well, the benefits still outweigh the risks. And then, okay, let's throw on all these other women who have developed lupus. Okay, well, the benefits still outweigh the risk. Okay, let's bring in the women who have developed multiple sclerosis. Okay, do the benefits still outweigh the risks? Okay, how many women have died from blood clots? Do the benefits still outweigh the risk? There are some of these patient information pamphlets that say 1 in 12 women will die from blood clots from taking the birth control. 1 in 12,000. Okay. So if you think 15 million women a day taking the drug, if their numbers are right in their own patient information pamphlet, if their numbers are right, that's 3 women every day in the United States dying from blood clots. Do the benefits still outweigh the risks? That's just one side effect.
Yeah, and that's kind of a short-term side effect.
Yeah.
In essence, I mean, that life was cut short. Look, you've mentioned all the autoimmune between lupus, MS, Hashimoto's. These are chronic illnesses. I know with PCOS, there are 4 separate types. One of them, the most prominent, is insulin resistance.
Right.
Most doctors, when a patient has been diagnosed with PCOS, put them on hormonal birth control. Usually it's a combination pill. One of the side effects of the combination pill is it increases insulin resistance, which is just adding that fuel to the fire for the PCOS.
Yep.
And I know I've come across different ladies. They're like, I was diagnosed with PCOS. And I ask, what type? What do you mean, what type? I didn't know there were different types. It's just almost a lack of information. And it seems like they want to keep us with that little bit of not enough information to actually connect those dots. On like, hold on here. You're putting me on a medication that could exacerbate my condition. It baffles me. And then I get the weird look like, what are you talking about? You're off your rocker. I'm
Right.
just like, go look. I mean, we've talked about the Nelson pill hearings. We've talked about all some of the other physicians and stuff like that. Where else, if people don't want to take our word for it, where else can people really find information, true information, scientific backed? Because I know that's a big thing now, on this information to say, okay, maybe I really do need to look into this.
Well, I think we're to a point where we're almost on our own. I mean, there are other authors who have written about it. Who write things, and it it just feels like science has gotten to a point where it's hard to. I don't know. Y- I don't know what I want to say here. It feels like science can be bought. If you want to find a study, if you want to have a study that proves X, Y, or Z, like I'll give you a for example. In the book, I write about lupus, and so there was this. I think it was called the Selena trial, where the lead investigator basically came out and said, for years now, we've been telling women that no, never in any circumstance should you take birth control if you have lupus. Our study is designed to try to find if that's accurate or not, essentially. So essentially, the study was designed to try to find women with lupus who could safely take birth control. That was the whole goal of the study. And so they set up these limitations of, the woman had to have very well controlled lupus, not have been on prednisone more than, so many milligrams per body weight kind of thing, have a blood pressure below a certain level. So they found these very healthy lupus patients. I think there were just over 100 of them, who whose lupus was under control, and they did this test with birth control, and they did okay. It wasn't horrible. So now they had a study where they could say, oh, okay, well, now we can tell women, yes, if you have, lupus that's under control, it's okay to take birth control. And then that one little mitigating, phrase comes out eventually, and then you start saying yes to everybody who has lupus. It's not based on any certain parameters. It's just, oh yeah, you have lupus, no problem. You can still take birth control. So that's where we have to be careful with science. We have to look at what's the motivation behind it, and who funded it, and all that kind of thing. And I feel like it's getting, especially with all the attacks on things labeled as misinformation, I feel like it's harder and harder to, how do we know? Um, but I think a lot of it's intuitive, right? And I think, one of the things I think I had in the book a couple times is, you know, trust your questions more than the answers. Your doctor, yeah, sure, there are going to be certain things you may bring to your doctor, and you may say, well, I read this, and he or she is going to get mad with you and say, don't go to Dr. Google, trust me. I had years of training, blah blah blah. I would say stay away from doctors who get, it's another thing that came up in the hearings was talking about, Plato's talking about the doctors who treated slaves versus the doctors who treated the free man. I think too many doctors today behave like doctors of slaves, where they come in as the authoritarian who's going to tell you this is what we're going to do. But hey, it's your body. You're the one who's going to take it. You're the one who's going to live with the consequences, good or bad. All right. So I think we look for doctors who treat us more like the doctors of the free men that Plato referred to, where they enter into dialogue with you, and they're not going to force a treatment on you or dictate to you, but they're going to try to convince you, here's what I think is best for you, and here's why. But they're not going to try to, subvert your will, or coerce you into what they want to do. And I think that we need to have more of that. We also, like, I didn't want much of citations in my book, so I don't have a lot of footnotes and things like that. But I did try to include enough information where if somebody doubted me or wanted to read it for themselves or wondered about my bias or whatever, that they could easily, go on PubMed and Google Scholar and find the study and read it for themselves. I think that's what we need to do, is just kind of be more proactive in being advocates for ourselves. Go on Google Scholar, learn how to read some of these studies and understand what because there's always going to be spin doctors. There's always going to be somebody that can twist it,
Mhm.
to tell you, oh, it's not so bad. Benefits still outweigh the risks. More research needs to be done, more questions and answers. They're always going to be ready to spin it. But I think we have to be ready to advocate for ourselves, look into things ourselves, trust our questions more than the answers. If you take something and you start to experience side effects, no matter how much the doctor tells you it's impossible that caused it. So many times I've had that with women who reach out to me to say, My doctor told me this side effect was impossible with this drug, but then I went and read the drug's patient information pamphlet, and it's right there in the warnings, you know? So who do you believe, the patient information pamphlet or your doctor who's telling you, no, it's impossible that it caused that? We just have to be, we have to question everything, I think, and be more open to not just accepting what our doctors tell us.
I am in agreement. And oh my goodness, so much information has been discussed today between us. Where can people find you and more about your book? I know we talked about your Facebook group. I know we talked about your book. Where can people find more about you and what you've done to kind of connect the dots on how you got to where you are? Where can they find stuff on you?
So the book is on Amazon. I have a website that I still need to do some more work on called inthenameofthepill.com. I'm on Instagram at In the Name of the Pill. I'm on Facebook at Mike Gaskins. And then you know, you can Google me. I've written several articles primarily for Hormones Matter and Natural Womanhood on a lot of different subjects. You know, some new stuff past when the book came out, and so that's, I guess that's the gist of it.
Before we go, do you have any wise words of wisdom to take with us?
Oh wow, wise words of wisdom.
I know you've had a lot of mic
Uh,
drops in this.
um, yeah, you know, I think like I was just saying, just the kind of being aware, being prepared to be your own advocate. If something doesn't feel right, then don't just accept the answer, you know, that's been given to you. It may, you know, mean looking for a new doctor. It may mean looking for, you know, you maybe you've never thought about naturopaths or kind of it may be, you know, kind of opening up your mind to I need to figure out what's going on because I'm not getting satisfactory answers. Um, I think that's the biggest thing. And then just I, I don't know. I have to think words of wisdom. You put me on the spot. I'm not a wise man. I have to think about things like that before. I can't just come off the cuff with something wise.
Oh, you gave us so many wise words of wisdom. So it's they if they missed it, they can go back and listen to it again. Because it
Fair
I'm
enough.
just sitting here
You,
going, oh my gosh, yes, 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 yes. So
I
many
will say
different
this
moments.
too. You know, because you know, I'm kind of mentioned how so many things are thrown out as misinformation and things get distorted and turned around. But for me, that was one of the things that was really eye-opening too, is to go back and look at the Nelson pill hearings and see how much of what was being said back then has been prophetic. And for me, the big one, the big one was breast cancer. They were seeing changes back then. And you'll have doctors today telling you breast cancer, birth control and breast cancer is a thing of the past. Those two things are not connected anymore. That was the original formulation, whatever. They'll try to dismiss it and convince you that birth control has nothing to do with breast cancer. But if you go back and you read the hearings, doctors were warning. They were seeing changes in the cells of the breasts, and they were concerned that it was going to lead to more cases of breast cancer. They told the drug companies, and the drug companies responded by marketing it, telling women it would make their breasts fuller. So they didn't see a problem with it, right? It's going to make your breasts fuller, nothing to worry about here. So in the testimony, I think it was Dr. Max Cutler said, we're seeing around 75 to 80,000 diagnoses every year of breast cancer. Okay, this was 1970. One in every 20 women is diagnosed with breast cancer. If we see even a 10% increase, this is going to be a tragic event from this one drug. Okay, 1970, one in 20 women. Today, how many women are diagnosed with breast cancer? One in eight, right? American Cancer Society says we'll have about 310,000 diagnoses of breast cancer this year. It's over 380% increase from 1970. 380% increase. That was prophetic. That was a warning. And
Mhm.
today, with 310,000 women going to be diagnosed with breast cancer this year, we still have doctors trying to tell us birth control is not linked to that. We had the warning, we see the results, but we still have spin doctors who are going to try to tell us it's not related. And that's why we have to watch out for ourselves, right? We have to fend for ourselves.
Yeah, I agree. And yes, look into the history of this medication. It is absolutely fascinating. Nelson pill hearings, fascinating. Thank you so much, Mike, for taking us on this enlightening journey into your background, how you came about it, and how we can change the trajectory. We have a voice. We can say no. We can find other options than what's been given to us. So thank you again so much. I sincerely appreciate all that wonderful information that you've given.
Thank you. And thanks for having me on the show.
Oh, you're welcome. All the links Mike mentioned can be found in the show notes. Thank you, listeners, for spending your time with us today. If you found a nugget of wisdom or a moment of empowerment, my mission is accomplished. Do you know someone who could benefit from this information? Please share Embracing Flow with them. Until next time, love hard, laugh often, and as always, be vividous. See you soon.
Thank you so much for joining us today on Embracing Flow. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow the show, submit a rating and review, and share it with your friends. Visit my website to receive your free PDF on 4 ways to decrease PMS. The link is in the show notes. Until next time, love hard, laugh often, and as always, be vividous.